Okay, is this on? Good morning. Can you guys hear me? Yeah, great. So,
So? I don't know.
so. All right. Well, anyway, good morning. It's very exciting to be able to have this panel, which I'm looking forward to very much, about thinking about POPL going forward. And leading the panel will be Dreyer as the moderator. And I'll let him take it away.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Can people hear me in the back of the room? Yes? Good. Wonderful. It's a pleasure and an honor to be moderating this panel session today about the next 700 years of POPL. I'm sorry, next 50 years of POPL. The context of the session, as I think you know already, is that there's been this is the 50th anniversary of POPL. The first POPL took place in 1973 in Boston. And I'll actually have a little bit more history to share with you about that in a few minutes. But I want to start out by introducing our illustrious panel. And for each of them, I'm going to not say much except when they started publishing in POPL. But we'll hear more about their experiences at POPL in a minute. First, Xavier Leroy, who started publishing. He's from Collège de France, and he started publishing in '91. Benjamin Pierce from UPenn, who started publishing in POPL in '89. Nate Foster from Cornell, who started publishing here in 2005. Azalea Raad from Imperial College London, who started publishing here in 2019. Michael Carbin from MIT, who started publishing here in 2020. And Nadia Polikarpova from UCSD, who started publishing in 2019. So it actually takes a lot of courage to come up here and try to pontificate about the future of programming languages in front of a large audience. So please give our panel a large round of applause. Okay, so to get started, I'd like to ask each member of the panel to please say just a few words about your research area or your research, why you started publishing in POPL, and why you're still publishing. In it.
All right. Well, I started in working on type systems for functional languages, and imperative languages. So, of course, POPL was the place to publish those kind of results. That's where some of the most important past results had already been published in the 80s. And that was also the place to meet the people behind, including Benjamin, for instance. And so after that, I kept working on functional languages, especially OCaml, and we were interested in program proof, and then put everything together by all my favorite topics together by verifying compilers.
All right, so I am interested in all things types, including, of course, all things Xavier, and came to POPL because this was the place for types. Since then, I've been interested in lots of things, including formal verification, and POPL has become one of the main places for that, and property-based testing. I would say the thing that keeps me coming back is the concentration of people interested in the same things, but also just the general excellence of the community.
Hello?
So I consider myself a programmer. I'm interested in ways of expressing programs that are beautiful and that we can understand. And often I'm interested in finding new domains where programming arises. So I have quite broad interest in terms of the POPL community. I like thinking about language design, DSLs, type systems, semantics, and often in a sort of applied domain. I first started publishing at POPL because my advisor said that we should submit a paper to POPL, and so we did.
My area of research is weak memory models and semantics, and also verification. We had a talk about that by Victor, a keynote. I started publishing in POPL. Well, before attending my first POPL, I knew POPL by reputation. It was the topmost venue of programming languages. So of course, that's what we were all aiming for. But after attending my first POPL, I kept coming back because I love this community. I love the kind of interactions that I get to have in the breaks. I always say 50% of the reason I come is the papers and attending the talks, but the other 50% is seeing the people and interacting with them, and lots of new ideas come out of these, informal chats in the corridors.
Great. So let's see. I think I'm a little bit like Nate, where I'm maybe not necessarily a programmer, but I'm very interested in programmable computation. How do we actually think about abstractions properly? And that can include everything from semantics, analysis, verification, all of it. And more recently, it's been a lot of work in programming in domains where there's uncertainty. Something fundamental like non-determinism or probability or even machine learning or even now quantum, where there are parts of the computation that we can't fully observe, I would say, or fully even compute. Now, why did I start publishing in POPL? Actually, well, I started submitting in POPL much sooner, much more early than I started actually publishing in POPL. And I started submitting to POPL because, POPL is, in my history of submissions, it's one of the places where I get some of the most detailed and best reviews of my work, where I can really come to a community and expect some deep technical insights on how I'm thinking about a problem quite oftenly. And so that's what brought me to the community, and eventually also led to publications in the community where the POPL community eventually started to accept some of the strange ways we were thinking about the world and some of the strange problems that we were thinking about. And that still keeps me here because I think over time I've seen more and more very interesting and sort of crazy POPL papers that are looking at all these periphery of what we think about as computation.
So my area of research is mostly in program synthesis these days, so thinking about new ways programmers can express computation to machines. The way I started publishing it, I guess I'm a little bit not traditional compared to the rest of the crowd because my PhD was not in a programming languages group. It was in a software engineering group, and our group usually did not publish a POPL, but we had this one guy in our group who was doing research that was different from everyone else, and he had a POPL paper in POPL 2012. And back then, when I heard about it, I thought it was really cool because to me, POPL was the holy grail of conferences. And I got to attend that POPL in Philadelphia because there was a conference collocated with it in which I had a paper. And then I just fell in love with the community. And then I decided that after I'm done with my PhD, I want to be in this community and I want to publish in this conference. And when I finally got my first POPL paper accepted in 2019, I thought, okay, now I have achieved something in life.
Don, can you hear me? Yes, good. Okay, so yeah, in preparation for this panel, I actually did a little digging on the history of POPL and how it got started. And like a true researcher, I started by just asking people, at the break, at the coffee break, if they knew anything about this, escalating up to more and more senior people. And I was impressed at how little pretty much every senior person I talked to knew about the history of POPL. My favorite responses were from Jens Paulsberg and Greg Morset. I asked them if they knew what was the origin of POPL, and Jens said, "I'm sorry, I was 8 years old at the time." Greg followed up by saying, "I was 5 and my paper was rejected." But eventually I got some answers, so I escalated up to people who were actually involved in the original POPL, Alfred Aho and Jeffrey Ullman, who you may know as having received the Turing Award a few years ago. So Jeff Ullman was actually the program chair of the first POPL in 1973, and Al Aho was also heavily involved in that. And I will just share with you a few remarks from the email that Al wrote me, because I think it's interesting. So he said that I was one of the people involved in the creation of ACM's SIGACT, that's the Special Interest Group on Automata and Computability Theory, back in the late 60s and early 70s. I served as chair of SIGACT in 1977 to 79, and at that time the SIGACT technical community was very interested in the application of theory to important areas of computer science like programming languages. The leadership of SIGACT was enthusiastic about getting collaborations with the broader programming languages community, so they established, with the cooperation of SIGPlan, POPL', a joint conference between SIGACT and SIGPLAN. The first POPL conference was held in Boston and was a great success. My observation was that the pure theory folks weren't paying enough attention to the practitioners of programming languages and vice versa. And the POPL conferences were a nice place where people interested in both theory and practice could mingle. I'm a big fan of the marriage of theory and practice. So we'll get back to the theory and practice question in a little bit. I highly recommend you, not during this session, but after the session, take a look at the first proceedings of POPL'. It's online for free on the ACM Digital Library. You'll see that it's a very different looking conference from the POPL conference we know and love today. And what I wanted to ask the panel was, in your experience since you've started publishing at POPL', how have you noticed POPL' changing either for better or for worse? And I'll just, not everyone has to answer every question, but I'll just start with Benjamin.
Okay. I see two huge changes for the better. My personal opinion creeping through there, but when I first started coming to POPL', there was a gigantic, it was like POPL' was two conferences. There was the Fortran track, and there was the everything else track. And over time, those communities have split, and both have gone on their separate ways, but I think not trying to have them all having their conferences at the same time is a good thing. The other thing that I think is great is the rise of new topics in POPL', and I would point to just one, which is the huge amount of work in program synthesis over the past few years that we're starting to see. So new streams coming into POPL' is great, and that's a big one.
Anyone else? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I don't remember the Fortran parallel tracks so much, but yes, it's true that it used to be a relatively small number of somewhat disconnected topics, okay, and some of them go independently, and others are among the most striking results that came out of this community. I'm thinking of abstract interpretation, for instance. And for me, one of the big changes was, to embrace logic, the program logics in particular, but also, not just types as devices for programming languages, but also types as for reasoning. And that has become a dominant theme of this conference, logic and reasoning, verification in general, and I think it's it's entirely deserved and extremely interesting.
I'll just add two things, one technical and one non-technical. So right after the time I started publishing at POPL', Xavier published his concert paper, and then shortly after, a group at Penn wrote the POPL Mark paper. And these ideas about, of course, logic and foundational verification had been brewing for decades, but it really felt like things were turning the corner. And indeed, nowadays it's not uncommon to see proof assistance used in all kinds of papers, whether it's formalizing meta theory or actually building systems. And so that's, I think, a really exciting change, and it's nice to see this kind of golden age. The non-technical thing I'll say is, I believe it was 2011 or 2012, a group, I don't recall the original names, but I think Kathleen Fisher and Stephanie Wyrick and maybe Ron Garcia, there's probably one other organizer, brought PLMW to POPL', and that transformed the conference. The original PMWs had, I think, 150 or 200, mostly undergrads, at the conference, and this infusion of youth and energy was really refreshing and just sort of changed the whole feeling of the place in a wonderful way.
Sure. So I wanted, since we've covered the technical side of things and topics, I wanted to also talk a little bit about the culture shift that I've observed in the last years in POPL', which I think we've taken many good steps in the right direction. I was also going to mention PLMW. I attended my first PLMW in 2013, and it was really eye-opening, and I think it's really important because it creates a more welcoming and inclusive environment for students, but also the things that we've done the last few years, including things like women's lunch or LGBTQ events, or most importantly, the mentorship program that we started, that was started by Talia Ringer, who I think is actually here today. And I think that has been a for me, it's been a landmark part of SIGPlan conferences.
Yeah, I don't think I have much to add, but to integrate on those two comments on both, and even Ben's comment. So topic diversity and diversity of individuals. It's also, so the first POPL I attended, I think might have been 2011, maybe 2012. I want to say something along those lines. I think so I had a history of actually coming more from compilation, traditionally compilation, coming out of Stanford. My undergrad advisor was Monica Lamb, and I've worked in this compilation community, and POPL always felt very distant from what I was interested in, or what I did, or who I thought I was as a person. But I think over the decade or so, I think some of those barriers have come down. Right, there are many more ways to participate in the POPL community, both technically and even just personally. I think that's been a great thing that I've seen over the years.
Good. Okay. So that's a good segue to my next question. So, and by the way, you should think of questions of your own, because in the last 15 minutes or so of this session, we'll be opening up to questions from the audience. As you saw in Eho's email, right, he's commenting on this, the fact that this combination of, or this marriage of theory and practice has really been a hallmark of POPL from the very beginning. But I think it also, we often observe these things in tension. Many of us care a lot about elegance and beauty and simplicity as core values of the POPL community, while many of us also care about developing rigorous foundations for real-world systems, or for helping people building applications in other areas of computer science and giving them rigorous foundations. And so these things are sometimes in tension, and I think they continue to be in tension going forward. But I'm curious what our panelists think about this. I know that Nate and Mike had some thoughts about this the other day.
Sorry, say again.
Yeah, I mean, how do you feel that POPL is fulfilling its promise of being this useful marriage of theory and practice, or are there better ways for this marriage to continue?
So, yeah, I mean, POPL intellectually, I think, is quite a broad community. We have topics that are kind of holy grails that we care deeply about, whether it's topics in semantics or type systems or reasoning. But I've always felt, I've submitted some pretty out there papers to POPL, and I've always gotten, great feedback from reviewers and sort of a warm embrace. I do have these kind of deep-seated worries. Probably many of you read Matt Welsh's CACM paper about programming 2.0, and we're not going to write programs anymore. It's just going to be ML models, and I think that that position's a bit out there. But I think POPL's been exciting because it's really programming languages has been at the center of computer science for a long time, and that's why our field is so vibrant. Is that we're connected to pretty much everyone, systems and even graphics and AI. Programming is in the center of things, and we are the community that sort of is thinking hard about what kinds of abstractions and how to implement them well and how to reason about them. And so that's been a very privileged place, and I really hope we can maintain that position in the future. One area that is close to my heart and that you often hear is, language design is a really important topic because it's the sort of creative, embers that spark thinking about new areas. And if you talk to people in the hallway, you'll hear, language design papers are hard to get accepted. And indeed, when you're thinking about a new domain, you have to do lots of things simultaneously. You have to have a new idea, maybe for some abstractions or how to implement it. You often have to make up the programs, you have to make up the evaluation, make up the theorems you're going to prove. So you're kind of fighting all battles at once. And it's hard to do that. It's hard to do those things deeply. And it's hard for reviewers to kind of understand in these new areas, is this a good idea or is this off base? So something I'd like for the community to think about is how do we keep an appropriate amount of these sort of allowing ourselves to explore new ideas, particularly through language design, and incentivize people to do that kind of work, because I think it will in the long term be really important to keeping POPL and the PL community in the center of computing.
So I do have a little bit of perhaps controversial stance, but I'm more of a theoretician myself, so I do have a theory bias, but I also really appreciate the importance of practical work and these beautiful ideas, taking them and applying them at scale and show that they're actually useful. But what I have seen lately at POPL, like having been on the POPL PC several times, practical papers are usually at a little bit of a disadvantage because you could be doing this amazing practical work and applying existing theory at scale with amazing results. And reviewers could potentially come back and say, well, where's the novelty? Where's the new idea? And I think we should have a little bit of an attitude shift in that if we truly want to be the venue for both theoreticians and practitioners to come together and interact, we should be a bit more welcoming to those practical papers that don't necessarily have that beautiful kernel of a theoretical idea.
Yeah, just to put some concretization there on both of these points. I think many people would complain or contend in our community even broadly that differentiable programming has actually been the major driver in deep learning, right? I mean, the concepts that we've seen in deep learning have been around for a very long time. But there are really two key enabling things that have happened since about 2012, since AlexNet. One is, of course, GPUs, significantly more compute, but also systems like TensorFlow and PyTorch, right? You used to have to code these gradients by hand. Of course, there were previous systems before, but these software systems at that scale have vastly enabled all of the work that's been done there, right? This is undoubtable. Some people would just say, like, this has been the key moment. This has really been the key enabler. And I have to say, I'm not sure how much we can claim that as a programming language community. I mean, it's very much software system. It's a programming language problem. We see tons of differentiable programming papers in POPL these days in PLDI, but the TensorFlow paper ended up in OSDI. It was rejected from PLDI, is my understanding. So Barak Perlmutter, he's done some very seminal results in differentiable programming, AD broadly. I went back and forth on Twitter with him. Some people may have saw this, but he submitted a paper to POPL in 2008 on some of these results, and he got rejected for just being off topic. People couldn't understand. They couldn't see what the value of this was going to be, right? And so that was yet again another seminal result that didn't happen in our community. And so I think this is a very important question. How do we actually enable this type of work to be captured? Because we're doing the right things. We're right there. We're still in the center even of this new trajectory for deep learning. But maybe we're not the first. Maybe not we're capturing the most practical or impactful results that are out there. And maybe we don't want to as a research venue. Maybe it's supposed to be novel, or maybe we do. I think it's a really good question for the community.
Okay. To move to the next question, so we're going to talk in a bit about sort of the future of POPL, but I think to understand that where we're going, we need to know where we've been. So could the panelists say something about what you feel are the most fundamental or impactful or important contributions that have come out of the POPL community from your perspective in the past 50 years, either in the form of a paper or ideas or languages or even values that we have tried to transmit to the rest of the CS community. Nadia.
Yeah, I would love to start. So for my area specifically for program synthesis, I think POPL has really been the home community and has been, that's where some of our most important papers have come from. For example, I don't know if you were paying attention to what the most influential paper from 10 years ago was in 2020 and 2021, but both of those were synthesis papers. Both of them were presented with Gilvani. And in particular, the 2011 one is the Flashfill paper. For those of you who don't know, Flashfill is sort of the most famous and practical example of applications of program synthesis. And yeah, so POPL has been a really important venue for program synthesis in that sense.
So yeah, I tried to find some specific papers and specific results that I find extremely influential now, 10, 20, 30, 40 years after. I already mentioned abstract interpretation, the 1976 paper, but I have to mention it a second time because this was really concentrated goodness. One that I was not expecting, and which actually is the work of Philip Vadler and Simon Payton-Jones on monads for programming. So that was an invited talk in 92 and a paper in 93, which I think is one of the most cited and downloaded paper. And it was, I think it's completely representative of POPL. You know, you take a device, an obscure device from denotational semantics and categorical semantics by Eugenio Maggi, and you find a lot many uses for programming and for reasoning about programs. So that was a very nice result. And maybe skipping ahead, well, sometimes the ideas were published elsewhere, but really were really very well developed in this community. So I'm thinking of separation logic and concurrent separation logic. CSL was published at Concurrency Conference. Yet, I think it's really in this community that it was kind of rebuilt on top of, you know, in a foundational style and then generalized and then, well, leading to things like Iris. I'm sorry, I don't want to make you blush, but well, that's a very nice achievement.
Continuing in the vein of types everywhere, I have to mention the System F to typed assembly language paper that really exploded people's mindset about where types belonged and where they could be useful. And then another whole line of work was just again about types, but the specific idea like parametricity, which I was surprised to find did not originally appear in POPL. But I feel like POPL has kind of become the home community for exploring those ideas in their theoretical and practical incarnations.
So continuing in the vein of separation logic, to me, one of the most influential papers that I've actually seen the impact of is a paper by Hong-Sik Yang and Peter Ahern and several others on by abduction, which essentially says there's this beautiful idea of separation logic, very theoretical. Now let's take that and come up with this approach of automating the process of generating and inferring specifications of program, which of course then led to a startup by the same people, which was then bought out by Facebook and started this whole trend and this theme in programming languages research of automated tools for program verification. And I have actually in the last 10 years witnessed the impact of that. To me, that paper is beautiful.
So some of my systems colleagues talk about PL people as being magicians because we invent these abstractions or we do things with types that just seem amazing, and we've touched on that already. Two papers that I really just loved, in part because I read them at an impressionable age, and in part because I think they're really beautiful. One is Nekula's proof carrying code paper, and there's a couple other papers before that, which I really think of as first of all just beautiful and sort of amazing. The idea that you could use proofs in this way to allow code that's being shipped to some client who didn't trust it and didn't produce it to know stuff about it. And just the way it was done, in LF and so on, was just, it sort of all clicks together and it's really beautiful. Another paper that, when I was looking back, that again I read at a young age and I thought was really beautiful, is Liang, Hudak, and Jones's monad transformers and modular interpreters. And again, it's kind of staying in the domain of lambda calculus and type systems, but just doing beautiful things. So showing how you can build interpreters, which are sort of the bread and butter of programming language implementations, in this modular way, using types to guide the implementation. So I think of these as kind of being the essence of POPL. There's really, complex stuff going on, proofs and mobile code and complex implementations, but they've been distilled down to their sort of beautiful essence and then and done in a really elegant way.
So, kind of keeping on this theme of, in some sense, a separation. One surprising thing for me, so I teach a compilers class every year, and several years ago I was actually doing a literature search just around to put some citations around the data flow analysis part of my lecture. And of course, you get back to Kazoo, as abstract interpretation, foundational POPL 77. But also then the original data flow framework from Kildall actually showed up in the first POPL in 1973. And that was, when I found that at that time, that was a surprise to me, because I always, again, associated a lot of that work with PLDI or the whale book, to some extent dragon book. And it's like, oh, there's this POPL paper. Right? And you look back, as you were pointing out again, that initial community was very different, perhaps, of how we think about structure these days.
All right. So transitioning to looking forward, what are some directions? Well, either grand challenges that you see POPL being poised or should be poised to pursue, or other areas that you'd like to see POPL moving more towards or interacting with. Start with that.
Yeah, happy to take that. So maybe we can talk about the one of the elephants in the room, which is AI taking over and us not having to program anymore. Well, I think
That's not true.
this does not make the programming languages community irrelevant. This makes us, even more relevant than ever, because someone has to bring order to this chaotic world of, machine-written code. And I think in particular, so the values of these community of like elegance and beauty and formalization are definitely crucial to bringing some order to this new world. But also I would like to add into the mix, so I think the future is really taking these ideas that come from the machine learning and AI area, mixing them together with the programming languages ideas, but also with ideas from the human-computer interaction community, because this is really not just about the machine, it's not just about the machine and the language, but it's about the machine, the language, and the human who is sitting on the other side of the screen, right? And about them being able to express what they want, and about them being able to understand the code that the machine is generating, right? And so I think it's our job to help people do that. And that's the kind of work that I'm very excited about these days. And some people in my group who are also in this room are doing is essentially looking at how can we help programmers make sense of this code, and how can we help programmers work together with these new program generating models.
I would like to pick up on the HCI angle, because I also think that's going to be very important. I think it's always been the case that programming language people have been interested in the human interface, because programming languages are tools for human programmers to use to think about their programs. So that concern has always been there. What has not been there has been tools for kind of rigorously or systematically investigating the human interface. So it's all been based on intuition and kind of hands-on experience, often just with one person, the designer themselves, or sometimes with the designer and their friends, or a small group, but very informal. And I think what HCI can bring is a great depth of experience with getting information in a not mathematically rigorous, but in a reliable and repeatable and useful way about the kind of messy, mushy world where humans interact with computers and in particular programming languages.
Can I add just one more thing about this? So, for example, one thing that I recently learned from my HCI colleagues is this idea about human in the loop versus computer in the loop systems, which somehow I wasn't familiar with. So the idea is the difference is whether the machine is driving and the human is supposed to kind of watch over its shoulder and step in if it's doing something wrong, like with automated driving in like a Tesla, right? Or computer in the loop means that the human is driving and the computer is supposed to watch over their shoulder. And HCI people know that this latter kind of mode of interaction is way, way, way more effective, right? Because humans actually like to do interesting things, and humans are really bad at paying attention all the time, right? And so they know that we should be helping humans with the things that they're bad at and that they don't like to do, right? Whereas I think all the AI approaches to automating programming are kind of a little bit approaching it from the wrong side, right? So they're saying, okay, let's automate this fun task of programming, but the human has to pay attention and catch the errors. So that, I think what HCI is telling us in this case is that that's probably not going to work. And, we should maybe do it the other way around.
So yeah, I would like to start from two of the things you said. So generalizing from the HCI point, I think programming language design is still a mystery, okay? And we are not good at it. Let's admit it. So yeah, we can look at look on the HCI side. Personally, I was at some point interested in what the humanities would have to say about that, particular general linguistics. Remember those grammatical frameworks that we shared with them back in the day, and now we've completely diverged. Or maybe even semiotics. If you can do semiotics of pretty much every human production, why don't you do semiotics for programming languages? And again, I didn't find anything particularly interesting, but I guess this remains as kind of a big mystery to me. And now for the AI and end of programming, I fully agree with Nadia about yes, automating the writing of the program is not the interesting thing to do because anyway, writing program is not that hard these days. We have pretty good tools and practice and so on. It's making sure they work that is hard and convincing others that they work. And I will be a lot more impressed by AI when it writes test suites and does code reviews for me. Okay. And so maybe to come back to the original question of kind of what are the next challenges, I'm not sure at all, but looking back, I have the impression that we've really benefited a lot from logic, mathematical logic. Okay, that has been kind of the driving force behind many of our progress. And so for the future, I hesitate between what is the other field of mathematics that's going to revolutionize programming and programming languages. So, well, if you think about AI, that would be statistics, and I'm not sure we are really ready to use statistics really cleverly in programming languages. And there's also a push towards category theory, which I'm a little bit afraid of because it's way out of my league. But well, I'll let you pick maybe the next mathematical booster we could apply to our research field.
No.
So this is a little bit of a different kind of answer. So we've been talking about HCI, and another sort of human interface is the interface between POPL and the rest of the world. So I've thought it's funny how we're a community that prides ourselves on, yes, we solve really hard problems in semantics and in very mathematical areas of programming, but we also strive to make things simple and elegant, and compositionality is our guiding principle. And yet, if you ask any other computer scientist, from another field, and say, "Hey, read this POPL paper," without even looking at it, they'll say, "Oh, that's scary." And I've had friends in the networking community try to read POPL papers that I've written in networking, and they say, I could read the intro, and then the Greek letters started coming, and I couldn't make sense of it. So I don't think that we should, dumb down our papers or try to make them readable by people without the proper background. We're a community. We're working on a set of topics in an advanced area of computing, and we need to have a common sense of a common vocabulary, a common sense of what problems we work on, and so on. But it's also important, I think, to maintain this interface with the rest of computing. And I was thinking about how if you look at the early POPL proceedings, many of them are about parsers, right? Because writing parsers and having people write grammars and generate the parsers and so on was seen as an important thing. And so that's maybe in our DNA is this idea that we're also doing all this work to support people who are designing and building languages for practical purposes. So again, not to say that POPL should change. I think POPL's doing its job in terms of maintaining the intellectual frontier of the field. But there may be some gaps in how practitioners view POPL. And I think it's telling that many contemporary language designs seem to come from people outside the community, and that's fine, right? They have their own problems. They have domain knowledge that we don't have. But I would love for there to be a more fruitful or more active exchange. I'd like to, this phenomenon where something important happens outside and it's a new language, and then we all kind of say, oh, that's awful. Like, look at those idiots didn't know what they were doing, and then we come fix it. It'd be lovely if, the powerful ideas that the POPL community has developed were more easily able to be adopted by people on the outside.
Nate, do you have any ideas on how we might make progress there?
Yeah.
Because even I'm just thinking across this, we mentioned programming language design, HCI, and AI, and if I were to think of 3 domains of papers where I'm going to have problems publishing them in PL, it's probably those 3. How do we make progress?
Again, I don't want to say that POPL should change, because I think, we're lowering the level or whatever, like forcing ourselves to make these things readable by a general CS audience would be a big mistake. But I do think some investment in maybe other kinds of scholarly output that could, when an idea is developed, sort of continue reducing it down to its essence, and keep, and use it to do practical work, and then communicate it through, building systems and documentation and tutorials. So I think we've done that historically, and just not forgetting that's in our heritage is important.
Yeah, I mean, am I on? It seems to me one of the problems is the kind of people who are building these foundations and publishing them at POPL are not necessarily the same people who are going to then take those and apply them in practice, or apply them in designing a language in a company, or you could do both things, but not at the same time. And so there's not really a clear trend, sort of forum for that, making that connection. Is there any way that our publication culture can accommodate such a forum?
So, I mean, universities do have those offices who take your research and sort of publicize. I mean, I know MIT has a really good one, right? No?
But is that more PR?
But so maybe something like that has to exist at the level of SIGPlan, right? So where
For disseminating ideas.
people are more encouraged to, for example, write articles for, I don't know, it could be CACM, right? Or it could be a blog. We do have a blog, right? The PL Perspective blog. Now that I think of it. I feel like maybe we should be more proactive, like encouraging researchers to distill their results, down to these.
Actually, one of the things we already do is through things like tutorials. Having both attended tutorials and also given tutorials, I've seen that people really enjoyed that sort of detailed discussion of disseminating new idea at a high level and essentially promoting the research. But I've also seen practitioners attending those talks, people who are here to take away those ideas and apply it at scale. And I think the tutorials have been a great way of doing it, and perhaps we could do more things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be annually in the context of POPL. It could be other forms of online tutorials organized by SIGPlan and things like that.
Yeah, and well, to these alternative way of disseminating our ideas, I would add software. It's an extremely effective way of disseminating your ideas and putting them in the hands of people who are more practice-oriented.
Okay. Before we go to audience questions, I just want to wrap up with one more sort of introspective question, which is, over the years, I've seen a lot of changes a lot of improvements to POPL in terms of, diversity of topics, improving the reviewing process, diversity of attendees, mentoring efforts. What are some further dimensions in which you see POPL as either lacking or needing work, and how would you propose to, move forward on those? Azalea, I know you had some.
So one of the things that I've observed, having been on the PC and also submitting to POPL, is that there is a little bit of inconsistency in the attitude towards accepting papers at POPL and the topics that we consider. And I've noticed that the PC chair plays a fundamental role. Even something as simple as receiving instructions at the beginning of the review process, please don't kill good papers for these bad reasons. Don't kill it because they did X and not Y. And I think that that's really crucial. So I would like to see a little bit more consistency in passing down wisdom from PC chair to PC chair to be a little bit more cohesive in that sense. In terms of, I know that POPL has already grown in terms of topics, and we're already doing a lot, but I would also like to be a little bit open to new ideas, especially, I've only been part of this community for the last 10 years, but even compared to 10 years ago, I think that we were a little bit more welcoming and accepting those days, and you could see more papers that are out there, blue sky research of topics that were only emerging. But these days, again, observing my fellow reviewers, a lot of times they're like, this is, not applicable. Where is the, immediate motivation or the application of this? I would like, as an academic community, I think our job is to nurture ideas rather than be short-sighted and say, this idea is out there. What do I do with it? So I would like to see a little bit more welcoming attitude.
Any other thoughts?
I did not submit to POPL this year for the first time in a long time, but I've just always thought that POPL is actually a really good process. I mean, the reviews that I get are, of course, there are reviews that frustrate me and reviews that I think are wrong-headed, but on the whole, it's clear that so much time and effort goes into writing the reviews, and there's just a community expectation that this is something we take seriously. And it's important because it's not just about selecting papers, right? We could decide to accept 50% of the POPL papers or something and spend a lot less time making decisions. But it's the way that we communicate sort of some values, we maintain rigor, we establish just maintain the community. So I actually, maybe I'm a survivor who's published at POPL a lot, and so I have a too rosy picture of the POPL process. But I do think that, and I've worked in other communities where the way that reviewing is done and the way the community approaches these questions is just not, there's just not as much care. So I think we actually have it pretty good. So my biggest concern is how do we maintain it? So POPL's grown a lot in even my 20 years of being at POPL. The PCs are huge now. The conference is 2-track. I think these are good changes, but it's hard to take culture that worked with a 25-person PC and a 30-paper conference and scale it up. It's just, as things get bigger, some of the personal connections kind of break down. So in my mind, the biggest question is how do we actually, of course, there are improvements we can make, but how do we preserve the goodness that we already have?
But touching on that, in terms of preserving the goodness of POPL, another thing that I wanted to mention was that, and I don't have a good solution to this, but I think we're very attached to our low acceptance rate, which at some point at the boundary becomes really as arbitrary as tossing a coin and deciding to kill some good papers for the sake of accepting others and maintaining this low acceptance rate. And I'm not saying that we should water down our acceptance rates or just accept papers willy-nilly, but I think it's also the wrong attitude to stick to an arbitrary metric and say, let's keep the percentage of accepted papers below this number just so that they remain POPL. I've seen many good papers rejected for that reason.
I can't resist piling on. And I want to say something, I'm not sure this is quite fully ready to articulate, but let me try. I want to say something cautionary about the incredibly good reviews that we write in this community. The reviews, especially lately, the last, 10 years or so, the reviewing standards have gotten to the point where, if you concatenate the reviews, they're kind of similar order of magnitude to the paper. And I think that is mostly good. It's great. But it does have a bit another side, which is the harder you look, the more you see kind of what the paper could have been if some different ideas had been brought to it, or if they had gone deeper, or whatever. And that can turn into reasons to reject. Mm-hmm. Enough said.
And are you saying that's a good thing or a bad thing?
Bad. Can be both, but can be a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
I just want one more thing. Is this on? Sorry, there's two controls and it's confusing me. One other thing that I think has been a community standard over the years was that people really save their best work for POPL. So we were talking about this in the panel when we were preparing. Many of the SIGPlan conferences, some of the distinctions between them have, I won't say have been lost, but have been blurred. And so a lot of people just send their paper to the next deadline. And I think the values that we have and the sort of culture that we have work when people are really sending their best work to the top conferences. And if people start blanketing conferences with sort of every idea coming out, then the acceptance rates I think should be lower because half-baked work or not ready work is being sent. So something to think about. How we use the review process and how we think about these questions.
All right. Thank you all for answering all those questions. It's time for questions from the audience. So if anyone has questions, just raise your hand. Andy. And also state your name and affiliation, please.
Yeah, Andy Pitts, University of Cambridge. So we've heard a lot about
Yeah, I think
Put it very close to
very
your
close
mouth.
to your mouth.
Like this.
Okay? Yeah.
Yes.
So I'd like to hear about the physical and social aspects of POPL from the panel. So do you think 50 years from now your descendants will be sitting in a hotel room somewhere in the world talking to each other, or maybe doing their email instead of talking to each other, or what?
I think the planets will be melting by then, so probably not. Oh, sorry, am I not? I said I think the planets will be melting by then, so probably not. But Benjamin will have
had some
things to
thoughts
say
about
about climate change.
I have a lot of thoughts about particularly the interaction of conferences and climate. This is not very POPL specific, so maybe this is not the place for it. I'll catch you at the break. But I think it's completely clear that in the short term, we don't have the technology to do conferences a different way. I think COVID showed us that. But I think that technology is coming. And in, 10 years, 15 years, it will be here and widespread. Moreover, the pressure to not do conferences the way we do them is only going to grow.
Adam Chapala from MIT. So I think a great thing about POPL is it's a community that keeps its eye on really hard problems that have been known for a while, like problems from the 70s, like how do we really reliably write programs that actually work? But a tricky part there is keeping the 1970s idea of what is a program and not thinking as much about, say, shifting boundaries between software and hardware and the implications of new kinds of hardware accelerators or reconfigurable hardware like FPGAs that poses a pretty different programming model and might totally shake up what counts as software and what counts as hardware. And I see very few papers at POPL that are about reconsidering this issue, and as a result, hardware architects assume programming always must be the same because we're not suggesting new solutions to them, but they're suggesting fewer solutions to us as a result. Does anyone have any thoughts on how POPL might contribute more or differently to that dialogue?
Well, I guess we're trying to keep up with the latest fads in hardware. Look no further than weak memory models, for instance. But yeah, it's tough because these are things we haven't designed, and where information is scarce, and we have to reconstruct things a posteriori. And as you say, there's maybe new hardware arrives at a higher rate than we can handle, or something like that. But yeah, I love to be at the interface between hardware and software, but I would like to be a little more in control of the hardware, or have perhaps more exchange with hardware designers. Sometimes I feel they live in their own world, and well, probably they think that of language designers too. But well, so yeah, it's hard to keep up because we don't talk to each other enough, I guess.
So I would just say absolutely yes. Everyone should watch Hennessy and Patterson's Turing Award speech, The Golden Age of Hardware, and a part of that is about programming models and DSLs and about co-design of those two things. I mean, there are lots of problems in CS, but this is one of the big ones that's going to be in front of us. So I completely agree. I think in terms of how POPL should think about it, I don't think we should all become systems people, right? Systems people make different trade-offs about the kinds of work they take on, and they sacrifice a lot of, they often, not to denigrate systems at all, but they don't worry as much about formalizing things or doing it cleanly. It's more about, of course, there's design that's being explored, but the design is explored through an artifact or through some experience, whereas we tend to explore designs through more analytical means. So I think finding a way for this kind of work to be done in a POPL style, where maybe we're working on the kernel of some problem, but we're in conversations with systems people who are exploring it empirically, that would be the good place to get to.
Oh, there's a question back here.
Actually, yeah, let's take the question back there.
Hi, Andrei, Czech Technical University. So there's a lot of beautiful results published on, at POPL about like monads and functional programming, and even like very practical results about functional programming. But the most popular language is Python, which I think is a shame. Do you think that in the future we should maybe focus more on like marketing our work?
I could hardly hear the
Yeah, if you could repeat the end of the question.
Raise the volume.
Talk very close to the mic.
In the future, we should maybe focus more on marketing our work, make it more popular. Yeah.
Yes. Do we need to? Should we be focusing more on disseminating and marketing our work?
I think it's important, especially for the young generation. I've seen my students have a real hard time reading papers or reading in general. They are the YouTube generation, right? They like watching stuff and interacting with stuff. So I think if we really want to reach out to the next generation of computer scientists and PL researchers, one way to do it is actually thinking of other ways of disseminating, other modes of disseminating our research. This is why I said things like having tutorials is useful, like all these pre-recorded videos and things that would probably be easier for Gen Z to interact with.
I guess one question is, should we consider even having entire events that are geared towards this, not just a little sideshow at our main conference, but making this a larger part of our academic experience?
I mean, I argued this a couple times. I think this is in our DNA. My heroes, one of whom is here on the stage, as well as people like Simon Peyton-Jones, we're exploring, crazy ideas about how to program traditional computers, through lambda calculus and, lazy computation and so on, but also engineering these big systems. And their whole careers were spent in conversation between, hacking on getting, assembly code to run lambda calculus fast, and then going and designing fancy type systems and modules and so on. So I think we've traditionally done this, and the artifacts that came out have also been huge evangelists for programming language ideas. OCaml and Haskell and Racket and others. So I think it's in our DNA, and no big changes needed. We just need to remember that that both sides of our personas are important, the mathematical side and also being connected to the
It's not in everyone's DNA. There are many academics who are wallflowers. They're very happy hiding away in their offices and working on a whiteboard. And there is definitely the extroverts who really like going out there and evangelizing. And there's definitely two camps.
Yeah, well, I mean, and not everybody needs to do that. I think it's really very helpful. And I think it's more of how a community do we work together, understanding this is all valuable, right, to really have maximum impact. I entirely agree with that. It's a demonstration. And that's what you see with TensorFlow and how you follow along JAX. A lot of that. Martin Abadi, another key figure in programming languages, was very deeply involved with those projects and could see ways to guide that project, have both impact and have, at the end of the day, some interesting contributions to make back to PL eventually.
We have time for one or two more questions. Yeah. Hold on. Is it on?
Hello?
Yeah.
Thank you for all your insights. This is Charles from MIT. So several panelists mentioned the hurdle of having our results in PL being interpretable and understandable by a general CS community. There's a dual problem, I think, of helping collaborators from outside the PL community get their ideas disseminated into our community. I've had colleagues express that they've invented languages, ideas, abstractions that they think would be well appreciated and assessed by the PL. But the length and complexity of a PL paper makes them intimidated to try to enter this community. Do you think this is a problem? And if so, how might we address it?
Yeah, I think this is absolutely a problem. So I'm one of those few people where if I'm on a PC, I always check that, domain-specific language or emerging languages topic, which means you just get very weird papers, right? And you can always tell, there's sort of a smell, you're like, okay, they don't have a PL person for this particular microfluidics programming, example. And it's hard. I think it is legitimately hard to have that discussion on the PC if you really like the core concepts and try to convince people it's up to the standard. How do we fix that? At least for me personally, I will write very detailed reviews for those because I can tell they're missing just the expertise, detailed reviews that guide them on what they need to do, and maybe even suggest it'd be great if you actually got a PL person involved in this project if you wanted it to be published in this community. But I think as the community itself, we could consider, assuming we're not changing, let's say, our standards of evidence that we provide, other tracks or these sorts of venues that really allow people to participate. Like they can still come to a POPL or a PLDI and feel like they're part of the program, right? And their contributions are valued.
Yeah, I would certainly not advocate for changing our standards because so I try to read a lot of papers that come from the ML community that are relevant to program synthesis. And what happens to me all the time is that I get super excited about the title, get super excited about the abstract, and I can't wait to see how they did it. And then I finish reading the paper and I'm like, where is the content? I don't want our papers to turn into that. So I would say if people from the outside want to write a PL paper, let them collaborate with us. I want to work with them. I want to work on their exciting stuff. So we're always happy to help.
Yeah, and there was actually, so for several years, POPL had an off the beaten path track. OBT,
I missed it.
Yeah, I had papers in there. I think David Walker organized it. Yeah. I thought that was actually a great venue when I went for several years, and I would absolutely love to see that come back.
All right, I think there's one last question, one quick question over there.
There's another one back here. Sorry, I don't know.
Oh,
if you can see
okay, then take that one.
Sorry, the one back here first.
I don't know, I can't see who's has the mic.
Sorry, I'm over here.
Over there. Okay, great. No?
Yeah.
Hi, Nathan Taylor, UT Austin. Thanks a lot for the discussion. I appreciated the conversations around incorporating human factors into the talk and also around what should, around sort of that figure 2 problem with respect to reading papers. There's an equivalent discussion that we can have around presentations at the conference. We talk a lot about how PowerPoint forms a very poor local minimum, and yet the modality of presentation sort of remains exactly that. 50 years from now, what would you, in the best possible world, see presentations at the conference look like? Are we doing live demos? Are we doing something completely different in the metaverse or whatever? Well, what do we want to see here going forward?
Well, in 50 years, we'll probably just download the knowledge directly.
Exactly.
But maybe in 5 to 10 years, I would certainly like to see more live demos, presentations, things like that.
Do you want to? No. Okay. I think in the interest of time, we will conclude the session. I want to thank all our panelists for taking the time.